Call this meeting of the Town of Clayton Board of Adjustment to order.
Council just passed.
First, I think we have all members present. Item number 2, adjustments of the agenda. Any adjustments? Thank you, ma'am. And item 3, approval of the October 20th, 2021 minutes. I assume everyone's had an opportunity to review those. Any comments, corrections? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Motion by Mr. Casey.
Second.
Second by Mr. Sims. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 4, our first public hearing, case 2021-104, variance Riverwood Ranch Phase 1A through 1B and 2A through 2D, steep slope variance.
Yes, sir. The applicants have actually withdrawn the variance application that occurred late yesterday afternoon. So the application's been withdrawn.
Okay. All right.
Sir.
I said thank you.
You are.
Okay, thank you, Ben. All right. Moving forward to item B. Our next case is 2021-123-AA214 West Main Street Administrative Appeal. I'll turn this over to...
Before you do that,
I'm sorry, yes, Mr. Perryman.
Mr. Chair, there is potential because of the nature of my work that I'll need to recuse myself because of potential conflict of interest. So unless there's any objection, I'm so recusing.
No objections? With that, I'll ask our alternate, Tom Anton, to step in on behalf of Mr. Perryman.
I'll go sit out there.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I too may have a conflict. I don't think that I do, but I received a letter in 214 West Main. I'm an adjacent property owner. I feel like I can sit here and be objective. If there's any reason anybody thinks differently.
I just suggested if Mr. Satterfield would make a representation to the board, if he's comfortable with that he feels he can fairly hear this case and vote and make a decision in this case fairly impartially, that's fine. And that you as chair might just ask if anyone on the board would object, and also ask if anyone present, particularly any party to this matter, if they would object to Mr. Satterfield sitting in and participating. And if there is no objection, that I think would take care of making sure the record is clean.
Okay. Any objections by board members? Any objections by anyone present? No, hearing no objections, I think you're okay, Mr. Shepard. All right, I will open this public hearing and ask that anyone wishing to speak on behalf of this or against or present evidence to the board, please stand and be sworn in.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true? That's your knowledge.
Thank you. We'll turn that over to staff.
Right. I'll just provide a brief overview of the staff report that was in your packets. Again, this case is an appeal of a planning director determination that a specific use at 214 Main Street has lost its nonconforming status. As you can see, as was outlined in the packet, there is a timeline that we've provided. Essentially, in sometime around March or April of 2020, the property was sold to a new property owner. In April of 2020, that new property owner got a zoning compliance permit only for moving the utilities into their name. And then as you can see, we really didn't hear much from the property owner or the prospective new business owner from April 2020 until June 2021, at which time we were contacted about a potential for a zoning compliance permit. At that time, we notified the applicant for that zoning compliance permit that we would not be able to issue it because the use that they were requesting is not allowed in that zoning district, and the previous use was a non-conforming use that lost its non-conforming status based on the ordinance. The ordinance section at issue is the non-conforming section of our ordinance, the non-conforming use, which really just states that if a use has been discontinued for 90 consecutive days, for 90 or more consecutive days, or more than 180 days in a year, that the use loses its non-conforming status. So as you can see through the timeline here, planning staff had discussions with the applicant in June of this year, letting them know about that fact. There were several discussions back and forth in June about it, and then in August, a variance was submitted. Following that submittal of the variance, I had conversations with the town attorney as well as the attorney representing the applicant. The variance was withdrawn. I issued a determination letter, and they have now appealed that determination letter. The packet includes the full timeline as well as several attachments detailing, including the zoning compliance permits that were issued or not issued, and the application. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but the applicant's attorney is also here, and I'm happy to turn the mic over to him unless the board has any questions for me.
Okay, any questions for Ben?
I do have one, please. When Ed Little turned the power off, and I think it was stated that the applicant came in the following day, was he informed at that time that he had a 90-day grace period?
That I do not know. And it was a new property owner that came in. My understanding is that the property owner and the applicant who wanted to open up the tire shop are different entities. But the property owner came in just for a zoning compliance permit in order to switch the utilities over to his name. But I do not know.
Wasn't any written notice or anything else allowing him to know that he had 90 days to do it?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm
I know
aware
which
of.
way I'm voting then.
What's that?
I know which way I'm voting. The applicant does not know that he has 90 days to do that. I think that's extremely unfair to a property owner coming in and not giving that information. And now he's forced not to have his tire place there. Am I real wild about the tire place? No, not really, but that bother me. Now, what might bother me is if it becomes a car lot like the other place down Main Street does. That's which I think we might want to make a condition if we do allow that to happen. But he wasn't given the information.
Ben, I guess one question I've got, where are we today? What is going on with the property today?
Today, the business is not open. It has not been allowed to operate. They've not been able to receive a zoning compliance permit. So I believe they have installed some signage. If you drive by there, you will see that there is some signage advertising the new tire shop name, but they've not been allowed to open.
So the name's not Clayton Rentals LLC?
That is the owner. That is the name of the owner, but not the name of the tire shop.
What's the name of the tire shop?
I believe it is RC Tires.
Or City.
Yeah, RC's Tires, I believe.
I wonder if it's a subsidiary of Rock City Tires. Could be.
Yeah. So again, the applicant's attorney is here and may be able to answer some of these questions better.
Yeah, and Ben, second question for me. depending on, we don't know what the outcome of this case will be, but in order to, is there such a thing as restoring the non-conforming status? Is there a procedure for that? Or is it
Not in the
lost?
ordinance as it's written.
It is lost for I guess, right?
Yes, sir.
Chairman, I think that's the issue before you, whether the non-conforming status or the permitted non-conforming status was lost because of discontinuance. So that's the issue. If you
Right.
decide one way, you will, of course, decide
Right.
that it is, the non-conforming status has continued through this time period.
Right.
And my understanding is that whatever zoning that the tire place would have at that time, that if we give a variance, that's all they can do in that place under that zoning. But it would have to conform to our current zoning if we did not give them the variance.
Correct. Just a reminder, this is not a variance, it is an administrative appeal. So, but essentially, if the board were to vote to uphold the appeal by the applicant, then what the board would be saying, and Attorney Raspberry, please correct me if I'm wrong, but if the board were to uphold the appeal, what the board would be saying is that the property, the non-conforming use never lost its non-conforming status, and the use of that property as a tire shop could continue until it was discontinued for more than 90 days continuously or more than 180 days in a single year.
Is it customary to give the applicant a notice when they do get their power turned on, or is that just something that we don't do?
Typically, the planning department has not has not been in the practice of letting folks know if they're in a non-conforming status or if they're in danger of losing a non-conforming status. It's frankly, a lot of times we don't necessarily even know if they are in a non-conforming status until they come and talk to us and ask us for a zoning compliance permit or something else.
Just curiosity, if it were some sort of rental facility, would that conform with the use? Would that still be non-conforming, or?
Do that one more time into the mic, sorry.
Sure. I'm sorry. Would a rental facility be a conforming use?
I'd have to look at our regulations, but so the property is zoned B1. So any use allowed in B1, which is our sort of our main street commercial zoning, would be allowed on that property. I'm not sure, I think when you say rental, I think it depends on what exactly that is. But I mean, restaurant would be allowed, general retail would be allowed. Most of the, small offices would be allowed, a bank would be allowed, so a lot of the uses that you currently see out on Main Street would be allowed. It's, but a lot of the vehicle associated uses are not permitted in that B1 district.
Any other questions for staff? Thank you, ma'am. I'll now call on the applicant and just ask if you would state your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, gentlemen. I am Marcus Burrell with the law firm of Hewitt Law Group, representing M. Clayton Rentals, LLC. And a little bit of a handicap here. My client had some family issues out of country, and I found out about it this morning. So he is not here, but to answer your question really quick before I begin, Mr. Antoine, as far as rentals, they're property rentals that my client does. He purchases and then rents to a tenant who operates the business there. And to give a little bit more background information, timeline-wise, and this is, part of this is set out in my application for the appeal. The original purchase contract was signed January of 2020, prior to any COVID case being reported in the United States. this wasn't even on the horizon of stay-at-home orders or public shutdowns or anything like that. The closing occurred April the 13th of 2020, about a month after the first COVID cases were reported in North Carolina, right in the middle of Governor Cooper's first stay-at-home orders. The idea of purchasing this property was a family business. M. Clayton Rentals purchasing the property, and then a cousin coming down to actually operate the tire business, keep it operational, that's been there for years, and keep it going as a family business. Due to deaths in the family of the cousin from New York, that idea fell through. But as you pointed out, Mr. Satterfield, Little Tires, who was there before, closes their utility account April 14th, the day after closing. April 15th, the day after their account is closed, M. Clayton Rentals owner comes in, applies for utilities. Utilities have been connected with the town of Clayton since April 15th, 2020. There has never been a lapse of utility coverage with that. The family issues of the cousin coming from New York was stalled, and June 2nd, 2021, a new tenant applies for a zoning permit. He actually came a few months prior to that, was told that the town hall was closed, that he would have to come back when it was open by some workers out front. He had tried to apply for the zoning permit prior. And when he did apply in June of 2021, he was informed that, hey, you could have done this online. But in June, he does apply for the zoning permit. It is denied because he is then told that the non-conforming use has expired. The official decision by the town doesn't come until September 15th of 2021, when Mr. Howell comes on as planning director. Conversations with Jim Cawley and myself, and we go from, excuse me, the variance, which was the original course of action to remedy this situation, to, hey, I don't think an official decision by the town was ever issued. Let me issue a decision. We'll go the administrative appeal route. And that's kind of how we got here. Other things for you to consider regarding kind of what's been going on. It hasn't just been sitting there waiting on things to open. The entire inside of the business was cleaned. Bathrooms have been updated. Machine operational, the lifts, some of those equipments. New ones have been ordered in anticipation of hopefully opening. And the tenant is ready to go if it is so inclined that you grant our appeal. We're not asking for anything new. We're not asking to expand the business. We're not asking for a new use. This business has been a tire shop for years. That's all we're trying to do, is keep the same thing that was there for years and put it back in as what it was. We're not expanding to sales or anything like that. It's a tire retail and repair shop. That's what they're planning to use the property for, the same that it's been used for years. So I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have that I'm able to answer.
I got one. I'm just curious. You said that they're immediately, just curious, ready to go immediately. What's the time frame? If you just say that you guys are good, everything's good to go, what's the time frame?
I mean, it's a very short time frame. Just get everything open, make sure everything's operational, ready to change tires, install tires, get an inventory in. But I talked with the tenant this morning, and he said, I'm ready to go. I've got some updated equipment that I'm going to put in. That's waiting to be delivered. So it's just a matter of a very short time. It's not, hey, if the appeal is granted, it's going to be another 3 or 4 months before they actually open. The tenant is ready to open this within a short amount of time.
So just for clarification, I guess the rental company owned the facility in April of 2020, and then they actually did not actually have an applicant or a company, a business to work out of there till June of 2021, correct?
That is, the new tenant applied for a zoning permit of June of 2021. That is correct.
And you chose, I guess, to do this versus apply for rezoning?
We did, and the reason is we don't want to change the zone necessarily. Everything else kind of in the area fits with the B1. The tire shop had the non-conforming use. We expected to come in and be able to continue operation, and kind of the dominoes of everything fell and a delay occurred. But the shop was ready to go if he could get somebody in there. M. Clayton Rentals owner is not in the business of tire installations or repairs. He's in the business of, he's a landlord. But he had what he thought was an operator to come in, and that fell through. And he did wait because it was family.
I'm just curious, June 2nd is when they, I guess Mr. Melton submitted an application request for zoning compliance. So he knew the process, but the landlord did not.
That's correct.
Is that a fair statement?
And kind of along the same lines that the landlord isn't in the business of operating retail establishments. He's in the business of owning property and collecting rent, where that kind of, he doesn't have to worry about he supplies utilities, he makes sure that the water and the lights work in the business and in the building. And the tenant comes in and says, hey, this is the business that I'm going to operate. Town, is that okay? So kind of just their areas of expertise. The owners did not align with, hey, I need to get a zoning permit to operate a tire store here.
For the work that the applicant did getting the building ready, did he pull any permits from the town in order to do any work, or?
I don't believe that the work that was done required, because nothing structural was done with the building. It was just updating some equipment, cleaning, repainting, stuff like that. So the actual work that was done did not reach the level requiring a construction permit.
Understood.
Question for the attorney?
Yes, sir.
In our considerations, the Board of Adjustments may reverse or affirm wholly or partly, and may modify the order. Is that the modify the order if we agree to the appeal, that we could request that, I just don't want it to be a parking lot of 20 cars sitting up there all the time. And I say that as a citizen of Clayton, not as an adjacent property owner.
Right, sir. Mr. Satterfield, when we talked about the business of the Board of Adjustment, I think I mentioned that administrative appeals came very, very infrequently, and I think this is probably the third case in about 3 months that the board has heard, and you've got an administrative appeal. So this is one of the unusual categories of requests that you receive. This represents an appeal by the applicant from the manner in which the town staff has interpreted the provisions of the code relating to nonconformities with the circumstances of this particular use on this particular piece of property. And the appeal is an appeal from the way that the planning staff has interpreted the facts and applied code provisions to this particular situation. You are being requested to essentially hear an appeal on this decision about whether there is a zoning violation or not. Staff has said that there is, and it relates to whether there's been a discontinuance of the use. The remedy that you have is to either affirm the staff's ruling or the staff's interpretation of the facts and application of the code to this use, or you can modify or reverse it. And one of your options would be to decide that, no, we don't think the facts come under the coverage of the code provisions that we're looking at relating to a discontinuance of use for 90 days continuous or 180 days within a year. And so therefore, the non-conforming status has not been lost and there is not a zoning violation. Now, that's just with respect to what is proposed and what the evidence shows you has been going on. It doesn't relate to the scope and extent of this business in the future in terms of whether it stays within the limits of the non-conforming use status. In other words, whether they can continue to do exactly what's been going on, but they can't expand and they can't stray beyond the uses that have been carried out. That's just what's involved in maintaining your permitted non-conforming use status. So it's not, it is not a blank check. It's certainly not just simply a privilege to in any other way violate the code provisions. It's just to maintain their non-conforming use status, if you're inclined that way based on the evidence in the case and the way you see the code to be interpreted.
Thank you.
All right.
They actually made me think of a few things. So, just curious, how long was Little's Tire Shop in business? Does anybody know? Decades?
Well, I'm the oldest one here that's been there longest, and 25 years at least, probably.
Was the signage ever taken down when they closed the shop, or did they stay up while they were marketing the property?
Little Tire Service signage stayed up on the property until it was sold, and the new owner came in and rented it supposedly to our city tires. And at that point, they hired signage to put the new letters up on the glass.
What was the, I mean, so I'm just looking at a perspective as they're advertising to the world as a tire shop. Was there a change? I mean, how long, it may seem, I mean, it's purposeful. So how long was the signage down between times that it was basically?
I'd say probably an hour and a half, probably.
So it went from one tire shop to another tire shop within an hour? Okay.
Yeah. It was
What we're talking.
It's vinyl graphics. The vinyl graphics were made up. She went over there, took the old ones off, put the new ones up.
And, so, but that's not who's actually leasing it. Did that stay up the whole time while it was marketed for a new tenant?
Yes.
What's the term of lease? Is there a lease signed on this? Is there a tenant actually sign a lease document?
There has been, his name is David Wad, and I do not know the term of the lease. We were not involved with the lease negotiations or anything like that. We got involved after the zoning permit was denied, so I do not know the term of the lease at this time.
But you know there is one that's been signed between the landlord and the tenant?
Yes, I talked with the tenant this morning.
Mm-hmm. Do you know, did he elaborate on what type of equipment he's bringing in?
He just said the equipment that was in there was antiquated, and it's tired, it's car lifts, it's tire jacks, it's equipment to change, balance, rotate tires.
Okay.
Just got one question for you. Say between June 7th and August 31st, was there anything that occurred that you know of with this matter? Just it's like 2.5 months there that we've kind of got a blank.
Sure, and as far as the business, nothing, because they were told they can't operate, they couldn't do anything. As far as kind of behind the scenes, we were retained, conversations were had with Mr. Colley, see what could be worked out. The variance was originally suggested, and that's why we applied for the variance. And then in the meantime, Mr. Howell was hired by the town. And so we were working with planning staff. And then when Mr. Howell came on, he contacted us and said, hey, got the variance application, looking at this. I don't think an official decision was ever issued by the town, a written decision. I've talked with Mr. Colley and kind of, it's another option for you guys to go. I can issue the official decision if you choose to appeal. So.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant?
Well, no, but I actually have a follow-up with the town. So
Okay.
one of the things.
You want to,
if I could.
so we can release the applicant if he's okay? Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
So if hypothetically there is a business that for whatever reason retains, like I just went down the signage logic, right, retains all outward appearances to the public that they are an operating business, but for some reason, whatever it may be, ceases operation and then continues again in that same operation 90 days later, they're technically in violation of the ordinance, is that correct?
If it was a non-conforming business and they ceased operations for more than 90 days, then yes, they would become in violation. Generally in town, just to give you an idea of our standard process, generally in town, anytime the business ownership changes, or even if it's the same type of business, we do require a zoning compliance permit to be requested and issued so that the town knows what's happening, and then the owner also knows that they are in full compliance.
So if it's a non-conforming use, have you ever seen that scenario actually play out just by chance? Where one existing business ceases operation for 90 days for whatever reason. Let's say there's a death in the family, or it could be due to an economic, or perhaps maybe even a government mandate that they shut down, and it's non-conforming. Have you seen them start up again 90 days later and have this type of ordinance enforced upon them?
I am not aware of that happening in Clayton. I know that's happened in other jurisdictions. I know, the previous jurisdictions I've worked in, we've had non-conforming standards as well, and have had similar, situations where businesses or other uses have lost their non-conforming status. But again, and primarily just because I've only been here for a couple of months now, I'm not aware if Clayton has had that happen, although I believe they probably have. And our zoning administrator, Dee Dee Bumgardner, is here, and she is sworn in, so if you'd like to have her come up and speak to that, she can.
It's a pleasure.
It might be worthwhile.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, Diddy, if you wouldn't mind. We need to swear Didi in.
She's sworn.
Oh, I was.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So,
Welcome, Didi.
good afternoon or good evening. So we've only had an occurrence of that one time. We had a business on the west end of Main Street that was operating as a church. And the church left, and a gentleman that owned a pawn shop in our town without zoning compliance moved into the building, started doing the renovations. We, of course, got a call, and I checked our code, and it was not allowed by code. Now, this has been many years ago. This had nothing to do with COVID. It was many, many years ago. But unfortunately, I had the task of knocking on the door and catching his attention, and the work that he had already done there, he wasn't reimbursed for because he did not come to the town and obtain that zoning compliance permit before going in and modifying the space.
Were they allowed to continue to operate as a church, or was that non-conforming use?
So the church, as long as it stayed in that location, would have been allowed to continue. But the church had ceased the use and left the building. And so the property owner then leased the space out to the gentleman who was operating the pawn shop. The gentleman started the repair of the pawn shop without getting the zoning compliance that's required for new businesses. He had put money in there. And so, again, as the zoning administrator at that time, or the zoning officer at the time, I had to go and inform him that the use as a pawn shop was not a permitted use in that zoning district.
So both the church and the pawn shop were non-conforming uses of the same
No, the
space?
church was valid. The church had gone through the process and was operating validly. They had received approval and zoning.
I'm just making a distinction, they're both non-conforming uses? No?
The church was not non-conforming.
Oh, okay, so that's not the same.
The only use that was non-conforming was the,
Okay.
so it's kind of similar in that, you know, Little's Tire was a non-conforming use. The next potential business owner would have known if they had submitted the zoning compliance permit for that use prior to going in and doing anything, they would have been informed at that time that it was non-conforming use, that the use had ceased, and any further use at that location would need to meet our building code, zoning code.
So he just came in to turn the power on.
So the timeline is a little like this. Little sold the building. New property owner buys the property. New property owner gets a zoning compliance permit to turn the power on. No new business name is listed. He simply got the zoning compliance permit to turn the power on. Months later, new business owner comes in and submits the zoning compliance permit for the tire shop. Research was done. It was determined that the use had ceased for a time that made it now not permittable, and that's when the new business owner was notified that he could not operate as a tire shop there because it had lost its non-conforming status.
When he came in the next day to turn the power on, his intention in his mind, I assume from the attorney, was it was going to continue being a tire service store. And his cousin or something was going to come down from New York and run the thing. And so I guess what I'm getting at, if there is a building that is not in the zoning district it's supposed to be in, and the power is turned over to someone else that has purchased the building, I would feel like it would be the town's responsibility to inform him at that time that the building has been used in is non-compliant, but he has the authority to keep it that way if he puts it in within 90 days. I'm just saying that the average person coming in doesn't know how to ask the right questions, do the right thing. Hell, I get confused up here when I've been up here. I just think it should be the town's responsibility to inform them that it is a non-compliance use, and if he wants to continue, he's got 90 days to do that.
My only response to that is that I was not the one to issue the zoning compliance permit for the change of utility. I was not the one to do that, so I cannot answer that question as to whether they were informed or not.
Do you think it would be a good idea if the town did inform new people coming in?
So, you know, future, we can definitely take a look at having that conversation. But in addition to that, work was started on the building without obtaining the proper permits as far as the zoning compliance goes as well. So yes, we would be responsible for making sure this property owner understands that it is non-conforming business and that there's a certain amount of time. Again, I cannot testify to that because I was not the one to issue the permit.
It sounds logical that the town would do that for Joe Blow citizen out here.
Sure. As a zoning administrator, you know, I take every opportunity to inform all of our business owners and property owners, you know, regarding any statuses of their properties when I have the opportunity to do
One
so.
of the best employees town claims got,
Thank you. Thank you.
no doubt.
So when they do the electrical permit, to apply for electrical permit, what's on the application that gives town staff an indication that, do they put tire shop? Do they just put, you know, the landlord's name, or?
So what typically happens is when a property is sold, the property owner would contact customer service and ask to have the services set up, and their first call is to the zoning administrator to make sure that it's a permitted use. In this case, what happened was there was no mention of a business, to my knowledge. It was just that he needed to have permission as the new property owner to obtain an account to set the account up in his name.
So I guess I saw this from the applicant packet as well. So he put his name, Mohammed.
Yes, so as you see, it says change of utility, change of ownership.
Does it ask if there's a business, or does it just on the?
So they don't, you know, that's totally up to the property owner. I mean, if he was just interested at that moment, I mean, I'm not going to suggest that I understand what the property owner was thinking, but at that time, again, to my knowledge, because I was not the one to sign off on this, he was just simply trying to get permission from the planning department sent to utility billing to allow him to change the account from Little Tire to his name.
How often do non-conforming businesses reopen and they have that general knowledge versus this
I
applicant may not
cannot
have?
give you stats right at the moment. It's not uncommon, but it's not common. And again, as the planning department and as a zoning administrator, when I receive the zoning compliances, that's kind of one of the first things I do. I have to go, you know, the question is, are you purchasing the business straight out and operating as it is? If the answer is yes, then I just double check the zoning to make sure that it's a conforming use. If the answer is no, then the research is done to determine if the use they're proposing at that location is a permitted use based on our Unified Development Code use chart.
Yeah, if I may, I think my general opinion on the UDC is that it gives general notice to commercial, particularly commercial business people who are in the business of leasing and providing spaces for people to be tenants and conduct business. So we're not talking about a residential type of thing. This is a commercial application, and the UDC is designed to provide notice of these types of things, right? I think the one thing that I'm stuck on, though, is the fact that we do have some extenuating circumstances that the attorney rightly points out about COVID, and the shutdown of things was an unforeseen, something the code doesn't contemplate and it can't contemplate when it's written. So I think the fact that we've had this business interruption in our economy is something to consider, and something that the code won't address. We're not going to find the answer in the code to deal with this, because the code does provide notice for this sort of thing. That's my opinion.
I do have another question, but can we call the attorney back up?
Absolutely. Any more questions for staff? I do have one question for staff. I know probably both, and Tom kind of alluded to it, but I know for site plan approvals, I'll just say site plan approval, there's been some extensions granted due to COVID. And I guess would any extensions have been, or can they be extended based on COVID? Or have they? Do we have that in place? I know for site plans we do, but could those be afforded to something like this?
That was done through actually state law, and I believe that that law has since expired. There is a Permit Choice Act still in place that allows applicants to, if regulations change while they're in process, it allows them to choose to go with new regulations. But the permit extension that you speak to, I think, did expire. In addition, I don't believe it really applies in this case because they didn't really have a permit to extend in the first place.
Okay, understood. Any more questions for staff?
Thank you.
Yeah, so I might have a couple, but the main one is, and I do agree with some of the things that Mr. Satterfield is saying, but one of my concerns, the things I'm struggling with, is that Clayton Reynolds is a LLC, and he's been in business for how long?
I do not, let me see if I have the formation. If you give me just a minute, I can look that up on Secretary of State.
Okay. And I guess based off of that, I want to see it as far as the link, but I guess my other question is, has he never dealt with, as far as if you're telling me his business is buying and selling the properties, is that correct? Because that's what
That's correct. He's a landlord. He's a professional landlord.
So is this the first time that he's had to, or he doesn't, are we saying that he doesn't understand, as a buyer or property that he didn't understand about conforming and non-conforming
And with that, if I may, the tenant is the one that generally will apply for the zoning permit because they are the one that is going to be operating the business instead of the landlord. So just like kind of any other, we have a commercial strip mall.
Yes, sir.
The landlord rents out the spaces, and whatever that particular business is goes to the town and applies for the permit to operate a restaurant here, a retail business here, a service business here. So each individual tenant will apply for the zoning permit instead of the landlord. So it's just never been his kind of duty as a property owner to apply for that zoning compliance. And M. Clayton Rentals, this particular LLC was created February 20th of 2020. So it is prior to purchase of this particular lot. It is purchased for, or is created for the purchase of this lot.
So are you saying it's a single asset entity to hold this?
For this, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak on this matter? Okay, hearing none, I'll close the public hearing and bring the discussion back to the board for discussion. We could take this by findings if the board chooses, take them one by one. Or does anyone like the discussion before we do that?
I think some discussion is warranted. This is very unusual facts in this particular matter, right? So we have a tire business. They sell by the timing of the transaction, what this was, they basically closed the shop in June, or actually April of 2020, sell it in June of 2020. There's apparently a tire shop waiting to move in, right? And who knows what the reason behind that is. We just know that there was one. Signs come up, go down, go up, it's still a tire shop, right? We did have COVID come around, and I remember the timing of this was very chaotic, right? March is basically when we started shutting things down. We ended up in a position in our whole country, in our state, in the region, where obviously a tire shop is going to have a hard go of getting started at that moment. Fast forward to now, we happen to have another tire shop that's going to come in the exact same location. I don't know how that works out. It's amazing, really, to me, but that's what's happening. But for the whole shutdown and COVID, we probably would have a tire shop there now under a different name than what's actually going to go in there. So the town followed UDC exactly the way it's written, right? No one could predict what was going to happen between writing that code and the events of 2020 up till now. So those are the way I see the facts, and the UDC, the town's doing the right thing. They're following the code. That's what they're supposed to do, right? It's not designed to handle a pandemic. So that's one thing I would consider.
Yeah, and that's one thing, and I appreciate Ben, his comments, but, there are extensions for such things as site plans and things like that, but there was a reason for that, and it was COVID. It was the pandemic. Now, obviously, and I know staff is correct, that did not necessarily apply here, but I think the logic behind those extensions could have been applied here.
Yeah, you're right about that.
Had a policy been in place, but I agree with you. I think staff did exactly what staff should have done, given the code as it's written. But, I'm willing to, and we can get further into this in the findings, but definitely take into account the timing of this. I mean, this is immediate, right smack dab after the pandemic shutdown happened, and a lot of things were going a little crazy at the time. So
I hear what y'all both are saying. I definitely think it's an unfortunate occurrence, especially of COVID, but I'm having a struggle finding, from April 2020 through June 2021. I mean, that's a pretty extensive window between those two.
Mm-hmm. If there's no other discussion, we can, did I hear something? Okay.
Pardon me if I missed this, but has the evidentiary hearing been closed?
Yes, I closed.
Okay, thank you. I just wasn't sure.
So if there's no other discussion, I think we can take these findings one by one and comment on those. Let's just go down the list of the four. Unnecessary hardship does or does not result from the strict application of the ordinance. Comments on that?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
There may be a slip here, but you're reading from the findings sheet that is appropriate for variances.
Yes.
And this application is not for a variance, doesn't trigger the hardship findings and the other four findings.
Okay.
This relates to interpreting the section 155.110 of the code, specifically that part that relates to discontinuance of a use and the permitted nonconforming use status. So that's the issue before you, is whether the code should be interpreted and applied, given the facts as you understand them, so as to constitute a zoning violation under the code.
Yeah, and just to clarify, so for appeals, there are no findings that you have to meet. The only guidance in our code for administrative appeals are the considerations that are on the screen. Those 4 considerations, that's really all the guidance the code provides when it comes to administrative appeals.
Okay, so that does not apply, okay.
You just go off the sheet. I see what you're doing.
He's got it on the screen now, and it's actually,
Gotcha. Mine is a little out there. Mine's out. Here we go. Okay. What's the pleasure of the board?
Start on one end and go to the other.
I'm sorry.
I said start on one end and go to the other.
Anyone like to make a motion?
is there, so we have 4 choices, right? Let's just recap that real quick.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Just so we understand what we're doing.
Is everybody clear on those considerations?
I think everybody's
Any
ready.
questions on those?
So to Mr. Satterfield's question earlier about cars and stuff, we're not allowed to make a motion and limit? Okay, I just needed, it's a little bit over my head, so.
So I think our 4 considerations or 4 options are listed, and they basically come down to returning the decision, reversing. Obviously, there's a modification of the order, reversing the order.
So, just to tease it out, if we affirm the order, then it can't be used as a tire shop. If we reverse the order, then we're going to allow it to be used as a tire shop. But we also have the option to modify the order, right? That's what it says right here.
That's what it said, but attorney said we couldn't.
Yeah, that's what,
If I may chime in, I do think the issue for you here is pretty straightforward, and unfortunately, I can't read the considerations. I don't think I've seen those before, but you're either going to affirm the decision that the use has been discontinued and therefore the permitted non-conforming status has been lost, which is an affirmation of the zoning staff that there's a violation. Or you will find otherwise, that you don't feel there's been a zoning violation and that the non-conforming status remains. That I think is really the 2 options you have, because everything else sort of naturally flows into place. I mean, if there are any uses in the future that represent a violation, if there's an expansion or a change of the use, that's not protected by the permitted non-conforming status. I use grandfathering because it's sort of, to say non-conforming, it sort of blurs the distinction between disallowed or illegal use, or a use that doesn't meet the code. This doesn't meet the code. It simply is grandfathered. So you would find that it's lost that grandfathered status, if you agree that there has been a discontinuance of the use, if you feel that the grandfathered status has not been lost, that there is not a discontinuance, then the nonconformity will be allowed to continue just as as it normally would if there hadn't been this gap period that you're wrestling with.
And that's really, so we need to decide if it was, what the operation of the business really means, right? So tire shop, tire shop, tire shop. Is it still a tire shop? The question about, we want to set aside the gap in time. That's basically what we have to decide.
Yep.
I think that's true.
And I appreciate that, Raz, because I think, and maybe others were a little confused with the four considerations, because the word modify shows in here, modify the order, but we are not modifying.
Right.
That is not, okay.
That's my view.
I'm very clear now, so thank you for that. And not to oversimplify it, but Tom, I think you said it there too. We're really, that period of time is what's in play here.
Right, exactly.
There's not a change of use, which is a whole different ballgame. Tire shop, they just, the 90 days passed. And that's kind of where we're at.
But it was a closed, unoperational business. It had tire equipment in it. It had the mechanical equipment in it, but it just is not operating.
Not operating, right. That's exactly right.
As the adjacent property owner, I'm not leading this horse, but I am ready to vote on it.
Would you like to make a motion, Mr. Stein?
I said I'm not leading this horse.
As adjacent owner.
I would move to reverse the order. The facts presented to me are compelling in the sense that it was a tire shop. Outwardly to the public, it was always going to be a tire shop due to the signage and the very brief moment that it changed hands. I also think that the facts of the pandemic and the overall business uncertainty lend to supporting some relief on this. Now, it doesn't excuse the fact that these are commercial businessmen that I think we're giving them, with that motion, giving them a great deal of grace for not following the code and code extensions that are allowed for the non-conforming use. And I would say that this is very highly unusual and circumstances under which we're doing so. So that I'm moving to set aside and reverse the order.
But I will second it.
All right.
So that is a motion and a second to approve the administrative appeal.
That's right.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I'm not in favor. I think the time period, I definitely think we're giving them grace if it gets approved. And I think it's an unfortunate occurrence, but we're talking about well over a year. Plenty of time in my interpretation of everything it could have been figured out or something. It's just too long of a time.
Before we vote, Mr. Attorney, this will require a 4/5 vote.
No, sir. This is not a variance request.
So
This
it's
is
a
just
simple
an
majority.
appeal of the administrative interpretation of the code provision.
Okay.
Simple majority.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion and a second. I assume we're ready to vote?
Well, I would like to comment on Mr. Casey's interpretation. It was over a year, I agree. He wasn't informed of the 90 days he had, though.
We don't think he was informed. We don't think he was informed.
We don't think so.
Okay. Motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
No.
Okay, motion carries. All right, moving down, any old business?
Chairman.
I'm sorry?
Just concerning the final decision document in this case, we discussed findings and conclusions. Our firm, we will be happy to draft suggested findings and conclusions. An alternative, since we do have the applicant that's represented by counsel, is to ask if Mr. Burrell would care to propose a set of findings and conclusions. I could send him a sample and let him do that and save the town some billable hours, perhaps. No, that's customary in courts, and that's one way to get that document drafted by Mr. Burrell, and then it would come back to you for the next meeting for final adoption.
That satisfactory?
Absolutely, I have no issue drafting an order, and I can provide it to Mr. Howell and council as well for review.
That's great.
And if you care, I'll send you a sample of one that follows a typical form that this board uses.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any, no old business, Ben? Any new business?
Just a quick note, due to the recent elections and two of our members, this is their last Board of Adjustment meeting, so congratulations, Mr. Casey, Mr. Sims. Due to that, we will be down 2 members for at least another month to 6 weeks. As of right now, we do have 2 cases scheduled for December. We are in the process of reaching out. Both of those are variance cases. We are reaching out to the applicants and asking if they would like to move forward or if they would like to delay, because if we do move forward with the variance case in December, it will have to be a unanimous decision. We would only have 4 voting members of the board because we would be able to pull up one of the alternates. So we would be down to 4 members, and a 4/5 majority of 4 members is 4 members. So just wanted to say that to give you a heads up that there is a possibility that the December Board of Adjustment meeting may be canceled. I would expect to be able to let you know that within the next week or 2.
Okay.
I thought in our bylaws, the ETJ and in-town can't sit in, so we'd have 5 at that point in time.
Well, I think because you're losing 2 in town.
Yeah.
One
Yeah,
jurisdiction and one in town,
yeah,
so that's
yeah.
part of the issue.
That's correct. I think the ETJ alternate could only come in if the ETJ regular member is not in
Right.
attendance.
I'm confused. I thought we had our bylaws that it stated it differently.
Yeah, we've had some discussion on this. Does that sound correct, Mr.
I'm not sure
Attorney?
if that's what your code provides. I know all the members have full voting privileges.
Okay.
So in terms of having authority to participate and to vote on inside the town limits matters as well as ETJ matters, it doesn't make any difference whether a member is an alternate or not. But I do know the code directs that there be, well, statutes directs that there be rough proportionality between populations, ETJ population and inside the corporate limits population.
And I guess, based on our previous discussion, Raz, if the applicant so choose to move forward, knowing that our makeup was not what it's, what the code said, but they did not oppose that the case could still go forward. Is that a possibility?
That would be my opinion, yes. Any opportunity to challenge composition has been lost.
Right, gotcha. Okay.
When's the application deadline due? 29th, I think?
Say that one more time.
When's the application deadline for the?
So the application deadline to go to the December Board of Adjustment was actually the 1st of November. But we have, like I said, we have 2 cases. The deadline to get public notices out is next week before Thanksgiving. And so that's where we are reaching out to the applicants to see if they would like to move forward, because if they don't, then we will not do the public notice until prior to the January meeting.
I'm sorry, when's the applicant deadline for
Oh,
people
sorry.
to fill these seats? No, that's my fault. Should have been.
I'm not sure, I think it is the end of the month. My understanding from the clerk's office is that the goal is to have the new council ready to appoint, or have applicants that the new council can appoint to all the vacancies at their meeting on December 20th.
November 29th deadline.
Yeah. So I think the expectation is that the new council will be appointing new members on December 20th, which would be after our Board of Adjustment meeting in December.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Well, Ben stole my thunder, but I just wanted to thank Michael and Porter for your service on the board. Seems like it's only been a short time that we just convened, but do want to say thank you for all your service and good luck in the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah.
There you go. All right, if there's no other further business to come before the board, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Good evening.